plot against me. Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts my head high, and I call out to the Lord. And he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord. Deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes deliverance. May your blessing be on your people.
Excellent reading and excellent singing. It was incredibly moving to hear you guys do so wonderfully on that song. So good morning.
Morning.
As you may have guessed, the talk today is going to have a slightly military theme going with it. I first read that particular psalm. I was a 19-year-old private, fresh out of basic training, and sent for the first time all by my lonesome to South Korea. This essentially being my first time even out of my hometown. I am now in a country surrounded by people that hated me. And at that time, there was a lot of strain and stress between North and South Korea. They did have a nuclear reactor that was being built in North Korea, and it had the capability of producing nuclear weapons-grade material. So there was talk of war everywhere. North Korea at that particular time had the largest standing army in the world, and the United States had about 20,000 soldiers stationed over in South Korea. So we were a speed bump, and we were very well aware of it. So I always took comfort in that particular psalm. Now today we're going to try something a little bit different, see how it works. In the Army we would call this death by PowerPoint. Hopefully it will not be the case here, and it will actually help a little bit. But if it doesn't really work, make sure to get with me afterward and say, that wasn't quite a good fit, and we'll try something else, so that way I don't keep doing this over and over if it doesn't work. The reason I am doing it this way is because there are going to be some military terms and ideas that I have to cover. They may be familiar for some people that either have served in the Army or in the military, or are very close, have close loved ones that have, but for some others it may be brand new. And I just want to make sure that we all have the basic concepts, so we're all on the same sheet of music. So that is why we have this setup going on. It was just easier to visualize it than try and explain it with words. So over the last month or so, I've had several people within the church comment to me about how we as believers in the church seem to have this tendency to want to demystify God. We get somewhat uncomfortable of the thought of God exerting his powers directly over the world. And for some, it's actually kind of been easier to see the Holy Spirit as kind of the Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, kind of whispering in your ear what is right, what is wrong, do this, don't do that. Or maybe it's the Jiminy Cricket on somebody else's shoulder. You know, maybe your doctor, if you're having health issues, whispering to them what the best way to do things. Or on the shoulder of the politician, if you want a certain policy passed or not passed, that they will have that wisdom. Or maybe it's to have it on the shoulder of the speaker, so that they're giving a message that you wanted them to give. So, or maybe kind of, I would say even worse than that, maybe it's the idea of the holy hitchhiker. Someone that, you've invited into your heart to kind of take this joyride on this mortal journey until the end. I also have several atheist friends that I talk to, and we talk about religion and belief openly. And one of the things I hear often from them is that if the things that happened in the Bible were true, if God did all these miraculous things, why did he stop? I mean, before, he did some things like he crushed Pharaoh's army underneath the Red Sea. He laid low the Philistine champion. He brought a pestilence to the followers of Dagon, when they seized the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, and he crumbled the walls of Jericho. So where is this in modern time? I mean, it'd be pretty easy to believe in God if what we saw were the bad guys being smoked and the armies being swallowed up by water, right? So that begs the question, has God stopped doing these things? Choosing to hold his awesome power at bay and just let the world spin to see where it stops. Has God changed? Or have we changed? Have we become so comfortable with the rational, reasonable world that we as believers will deny the works of God in this world? To help answer this, I thought we might look at a singular modern battle. It's the Battle of Bastogne. It's very near and dear to my heart, being part of the 101st at one point in time. But I thought we could use that to answer for ourselves if what we see in this is luck, or coincidence, or is it God that determined the outcome in this battle? Now, I'm not going to get deep into tactics or army talk, but there are some quick things that I want to make sure everyone does understand. First thing we're going to talk about is the types of units. So for this discussion, we only need to focus on three. We have light infantry, armor, and artillery. Now the primary weapon system for for infantry, light infantry especially, is the assault rifle. And the secondary weapon system is the grenade. Now for armor, or tanks as most people know it, primary weapon system is the main gun tube. And the secondary one, you can see on this picture possibly, is the machine gun that they have mounted on there. Final one is artillery. Artillery is a little bit different because it doesn't shoot directly at the enemy. It actually lobs the rounds over the friendly forces, or at least hopefully it does. Sometimes it doesn't. That's bad. But then it will land on the enemy forces, also hopefully, and it can have a great effect on the battlefield. Now, this might surprise you, but rifles are not very effective against tanks. Grenades are, despite what Hollywood says, are only very minorly effective against tanks unless you are really lucky and really close. To contrast that, the main gun round and the machine gun off a tank is very effective against infantry. When we go to artillery, artillery is moderately effective against armor if you get direct hits, and it is very effective against infantry when they're in the open. Next thing we're going to talk about the size of the units. Now I do apologize, I kind of tested this out and the font is a little bit small for people to see, but hopefully you'll still be able to get the idea. We're going to start with the battalion. Now the battalion is made up of 2 or more companies, and it has probably around 1,000 people or so. Compared to that, you have a brigade, which is roughly 4 battalions. From there, the next step up is the division. It can have anywhere from 3 to 7 battalions, depending on what its makeup is, whether it's armor or infantry, things like that. And then a corps is 2 to 5 divisions. The final and the largest of the Army military units is the Army, which is made up of 2 or more corps and can have up to 1 million soldiers. Now for our discussion, the 2 that are most important to focus on is the division and the corps. So here is roughly what the front lines looked like during just before the battle we're going to talk about. Now this is a military map, and on purpose they tend to be cluttered and really hide what you're supposed to know. But the important things for us is this is where generally the front line was between the Allied and the German soldiers. The Germans were about to launch an offensive, and their goal was to capture this town, Antwerp. It was a port. If they could capture this, they could stop the US or the Allies from getting supplies into Europe, and they could have extended the war 5, maybe even 10 years longer, or use it to negotiate more favorable terms if they were willing to surrender. Now, en route to that is this little town here called Bastogne. It's important because this is a heavily wooded area, and this town had 7 major highways that all intersected with it. So if the Germans could take Bastogne, they could travel all through Belgium with their tanks. Tanks do not like going through forests, and it tends to slow them down a little bit. So that is why Bastogne was important. Now, 101st Airborne Division of the United States had 22,000 light infantry soldiers. The German 47 Panzer Corps, which is a little bit bigger, had over 120,000 soldiers. I forgot to start clicking here. So this was actually a picture of the 101st here. So they had about 22 light infantry soldiers. The Germans had 120,000 soldiers in this offensive, and it included 1,400 tanks, including here, this is the Panzer IV, the King, or the Tiger, and then the King Tiger, which was the largest tank at the time ever fielded. Both sides had artillery, but the German Corps had more artillery and it had longer range. From the US side of things, this is what the Army would call a non-ideal engagement. But the 101st was all they had between the Germans and Antwerp at the time. So they were pushed forward to try and stop this armored advance. Now there are two instances I want to point out on the road to Bastogne. As they got the order to move out, they ran into an anti-tank engineer battalion that was actually retreating. It was one of the forward units that during this offensive was getting routed. And the 101st said, hey, join up with us, we're going to need you in the fight forward. And initially the engineer said, no, we're not doing that. We're with this other unit and we're going back to the rear. And the 101st said, okay, that's fine, leave your guns. Like, no, we're not going to leave your guns. It's like, then you're coming with us, we outnumber you. So they actually usurped this engineer battalion to take them forward. That's going to play a part later. The other thing that I want to mention on this move forward is that the 101st got lost. And whoever gets to Bastogne first, if the Germans get to Bastogne, there is no way a light infantry division is going to unseat an armored corps. Not going to happen. So as they're moving forward, they actually take a wrong road. The reason for this is it was very common to, when an offensive was going on, to either tear down road signs or to twist them and misorient them so it looked like you were going in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, it works both ways. So 101st gets to this crossroad, takes the wrong turn, starts heading away from their objective. And they move for about an hour. And a single, solitary, Allied military police soldier was found standing on the side of the road. Told the lead of the division, you're going the wrong way. You need to go back the way you came, and you need to take a left there, and that'll take you to Bastogne. Now, is that very lucky? You know, is it a coincidence that he happened to be standing there right as he was needed? Was it a messenger of God placed there? That feels kind of uncomfortable, doesn't it? Just a little bit. So, whatever the cause, it got them back on track. The 101st Airborne Division made it to Bastogne just 4 hours ahead of the German advance. If they had been on that road for an hour longer, with as long as it takes to turn around and get going back in the other direction, then the war could have been over for the German side. But they got there, and they started taking up defensive positions. Now I will tell you, especially when you're trying to take light infantry and use it to defend against armor, it's hard to set up a perimeter. But they knew they were going to be encircled, and so they started setting up a perimeter. There were wide gaps between units because they were doing it so hastily. They were trying to get into position that there were wide gaps between the different units that were setting up the perimeter. And if the Germans had probed into any one of these gaps and gotten into their division headquarters, then Bastogne is lost. Fortunately, when the Germans did send their first probe into the Allied forces there, to the 101st, they actually hit dead center of a unit. More importantly than that, they actually hit that anti-tank engineer battalion that I told you about. They hit directly into the teeth of those. So those anti-tank guns opened fire. The only weapon system the 101st had that could actually repulse tanks. And they went right into the teeth of them. Now, this worried the Germans because 101st, they had their intelligence community. The 101st was not supposed to have this capability. So they dropped back and kind of thought that out. Now, the Americans were worried too, because on their very first probe, the Germans just found the only weapon system that could defeat them. And so they were waiting for the Germans to just launch artillery on this anti-tank battalion. So they very quickly relocated that anti-tank battalion somewhere else, so the artillery wouldn't be able to hit it. The Germans sent another probe right into the teeth of the anti-tank battalion, which then repulsed them. And it didn't just happen this 2 times. It happened 4 consecutive times. Every place the Germans tried to probe, they found this anti-tank battalion. And to the Germans, it looked a lot more like this. That somehow they had an entire ring of anti-tank guns that were defending this village. So they stopped sending tanks. And they just decided to encircle it for a little bit. So, sorry, started getting into the battle. I didn't flip pages here either, so I wanted to read a verse from Joshua 23:10. It says, "One of you routs 1,000, because the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised." Now the orders for the Germans was, when they ran into resistance, just to encircle it and keep moving on. That way, the offensive wouldn't stall, and it wouldn't give the Allies time to react. But instead here, the German commanding general decided to demand the surrender of the 101st. And they composed an official statement that said, hey, this is the military situation, you are surrounded. They said the only way to save your soldiers is to conduct an honorable surrender. They gave them a 2-hour timeline to make their decision, and if they had not completely submitted in those 2 hours, they were going to launch artillery and tank fire to destroy the division. Now, incidentally, the commanding general of the 101st was not with his division when this happened. He had actually been at a military conference in Washington, D.C. when the offensive started. The deputy commanding general also was not with the 101st. He was on vacation in England for the birth of his son. So command at this point in time actually fell on the division's artillery commander. And he got a meeting around with his other senior military officers to determine how to respond to this demand of surrender. So when the Divarti commander, his name was Brigadier General McCulloch, he read the German message, he crumpled it into a ball, threw it into the trash, and muttered, "Aw, nuts." Now McCulloch was very well known for not swearing, so this was his substitute for more earthier expressions. The other officers looked at him and agreed that that should be the message sent to the Germans. And so they composed this: "To the German commander, nuts, the American commander." Now this response actually made it to Hitler himself, who took great offense. Some may even say his heart was hardened. So instead of just encircling Bastogne, it now became a matter of honor to defeat the 101st at Bastogne. And so instead of continuing with the offensive, they actually stalled the offensive to focus on assaulting the 101st at Bastogne. Now a more reasoned or rational or formal response, as may have gotten provided by a commanding general, may not have provoked the anger that ultimately disrupted the German offensive that had been successful up to this point. I'll go back to Joshua 11:20 this time. "For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly." This response to the demand for surrender, though, didn't just make it up German channels. There's a general in World War II for the American side. His name was George S. Patton, if you've heard of him. He was the commander of the American Third Army. He heard of this reply, and he said that someone so eloquent deserves to be rescued. And so he wheeled 2 of his 3 armored corps to head north and try and relieve Bastogne. Here you can see Bastogne is that little blue dot in the middle of all the red there, if you can see it. Now, I'm going to back up just a little bit because before the offensive even started, Patton was having a problem. The offensive started on the 16th of December, I believe it was. Bastogne actually occurred on they started the battle at the 21st of December, if I remember correctly. So around the 15th of December or so, Patton had a problem, and it was the weather. Rain had been plaguing the Third Army for months, and rain presented two distinct problems. First of all, tanks do not like mud. It slows them down, it bogs them down, they're easily stuck in it, and it kind of forces them to travel on the paved roads, which makes them great targets for enemy aircraft and artillery. Second, the storm prevented Allied air power, which had to travel further, to be able to cover Third Army when it was pushing east towards Germany. And the German planes did not have as far to go, so they could continue to constantly attack Patton's forces. On the 14th of December, a new storm front had moved in that was forecasted to last for at least 2 weeks. So Patton called his chaplain and asked if he had a prayer for good weather. Now, there are several versions of exactly how the conversation went, but I'm going to share one of them. The chaplain replied, and I quote, "It usually isn't a customary thing among men of my profession to pray for clear weather to kill fellow men." To which Patton responded, "Chaplain, it's your job to ask. It's God's job to decide whether to provide." Now, the chaplain looked in it, and he did not find any formal prayer. So he made one of his own. And the prayer read this: "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech Thee of Thy great goodness to restrain these immoderate rains with which we have had to contend. Grant us fair weather for battle. Graciously hearken to us as soldiers who call Thee that, armed with Thy power, we may advance from victory to victory and crush the oppression and wickedness of our enemies and establish Thy justice among men and nations. Amen." Now, Patton had this put on a 3x5 card and had his engineer team printing these night and day until they had 250,000 of them. And he was going to distribute it to every soldier so that they could all pray together. This was distributed, it was finally ready to be distributed on December 23rd. So, on December 24th, the skies were clear, the sun was out, as it was the day after, and the day after that. Overall, for 6 days, the heavens held the storms back. The rains had ceased, and the ground dried, and when it was needed, the army was ready to move, and to move quickly. So who is this that even the winds and the waves obey? Is it luck, happenstance, coincidence? Or was it that they called upon God as a people, and God answered? Now, on December 21st, just over 20,000 troops arrived to defend a town against over 100,000 enemies. For 4 days, they were surrounded, and they fought through Christmas Day as tens of thousands assailed them from all sides. On December 26th, the 47th Panzer Corps was struck on the jaw by Patton's Third Army. And the siege of Bastogne was over. And truly, the teeth of the wicked were broken. Nazi Germany never recovered. They were never able to mount another offensive in the war. There was still fighting to be done, but the war was over. From the Lord comes deliverance. And what I see in this is that God is as He has always been. And God does what He has always done. He has not left us. He has not withdrawn his providence from this world. Malachi 3:6 says, I, the Lord, do not change. So if someone can look at these events and claim coincidence, then it can only be because they have hardened themselves so much that they refuse to admit what is clearly shown. Their need to disprove the divine intervention has to be so strong that it actually defies reason and rational thought. Or maybe it could be pride getting in the way that blinds us to his glory. God doesn't do flashy miracles anymore because I personally haven't seen them. And I am so holy that if miracles are being done, surely I would have seen them. But that thought, that pride, robs from the faith, from the belief to truly understand both God's love and his power. Mark 11:22 says, have faith in God, Jesus answered. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go, throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt it in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Now today, you may feel surrounded. It may be that the enemies are people that are taunting you, that are threatening you. It may be enemies of an earthly nature, lust, pride, greed, that threaten to overwhelm you. But God continually shows his power to win every battle, from within the heart to throughout the entirety of the world. He shows these things so that we may believe and take comfort. Romans 8:25-27 says, but if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with God's will. So if you feel today that you are embattled in a fight that is hopeless, if you feel lost or downcast, overwhelmed, then please lean upon the Lord in your battle and accept his divine power, his glory, and his invitation as we sing.
One.